everyone, and welcome to something new that we are going to be doing called SnodaReels. I'm your host, BlackChef56. I'm, of course, joined by DimondAssassin and the lovely InaraSera.
Oh, I'm lovely. I like that.
Yes, you're always a lovely one. And, of course, we're also joined by our mascot, Eldwin, who is very annoyed, and I'm going to go ahead and put him back in his queue. This is an opportunity for us to basically talk about one topic at a time, give us, an opportunity to really talk about it for, 30, 40 minutes, and just kind of do topics that we wouldn't usually do on the SnodaCast. So, anyway, the topic for today is going to be directors making too many promises on films and whether or not that ultimately harms their art as a whole or harms their reputation, or does it make what they do eventually make, does it make it 10 times better? And the main example we're going for here, because he's really kind of the only mainstream director that really does this, is Guillermo del Toro. So, as a person who loves behind the scenes stuff, I do know that he was supposed to direct not only a lot of things, but the two biggest ones was he was supposed to direct the Hobbit movies before he'd ultimately back down, and then he was also supposed to go ahead and do Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, but then ultimately just ended up being a glorified producer for it because he decided to work on something else. But the most recent film that he's actually full on release that wasn't just him basically playing behind the scenes was Pinocchio, and I think that is one of his best films. I would argue it's probably better than Pan's Labyrinth. I don't know. I haven't really watched them back to back. But I want to go ahead and lead it to you guys. How do you feel about this particular topic? Do you feel it's validated? What would be your answer? That kind of thing.
I think it's kind of like a back and forth. It's a 50-50 depending on the situation. I feel that sometimes you might, like as a director, you might be presented a project, or whether that be like a big movie blockbuster film or something that's like not as big as a big title name. And I guess depending on whether or not they have the budget or whatever they are distributed with their resources, it really just depends on how the director wants to go at it. Because you can go into they can go into many different ways. The final say is the director. So
Okay, Inara.
Honestly, as far as what's the word you used earlier? Reputation.
Reputation.
When Guillermo del Toro first started doing that, and he was, oh, I'm gonna do a thing, and then suddenly he wasn't gonna do the thing. It kind of felt like an attention grab almost, like he was feeling out the crowd, if that makes sense. Like,
Right.
oh, if I announcing that he would do the thing to see how everybody would react, and then oh, they kind of didn't like that one. Well, I'll just back off and do something else. And now that people kind of know and understand that he does that, I think it's less effective.
I do too.
But also, it just kind of, to me, it makes it feel like he's not organized, which I know sounds a little odd, but it's it makes me feel like oh, he announced a project before he was sure he was going to do it. Or before he was sure he had the right amount of time, or before he was sure that everybody else wanted him to do it. So it feels a little yeah, at this point I just kind of discount everything until the movie actually comes out. I'm like, oh, he actually did that? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I feel like I can't even trust any of the news that involves him anymore.
That is true.
Who the fuck knows if he's gonna do it?
Exactly. So like I said, the biggest example would be he was when they were working on The Hobbit, he was originally attached. And I believe he wanted to do it in two films, which is what I think almost everybody said, that at the max you should have done a Hobbit movie. You could have done it in two films. Just because there's a lot of catching up. Because if you want to be technical, The Hobbit came out before Lord of the Rings, and there's a lot of setting up the lore in this world. But when you're doing The Hobbit as a prequel, and most people probably already know a lot of the lore, yeah, you still got to put in the lore for the normies, but it's just one of those things. It's like, I feel like you could do a good chunk of that in the first 10 minutes, kind of get people reacquainted with the world, get people knowing what they're doing. And then, of course, you could go from there. But I don't believe The Hobbit ever needed to be three movies, just because the Battle of the Five Armies, Bilbo is knocked out in the book. He's incapacitated. Doesn't even know what happened. He basically gets knocked out and clunked, and then you find out they won the Battle of the Five Armies. So, it's just one of those things. It's like, you don't really need to do that in more than 2 movies, right? So it's one of those things that I feel like Guillermo del Toro could have done a really interesting and unique take on The Hobbit or the Lord of the Rings world. And I do like the fact that they did bring back Peter Jackson. I feel like, but I also feel like he was kind of obligated to, because they're like, hey, look, Del Toro's out. You're our next pick. We wanted you to begin with, but then you said, no, go for this guy. And this guy just bailed on us. So we want you back. We'll give you as much money as you want. You can do whatever the hell you want, but we at least want 3 movies. And it's like, okay.
I think that can kind of be said for anything though.
That is true.
He has a really weird ass mind.
He does.
So like he's gonna bring a weird take to anything, and it'll be
That's
interesting to
true.
watch.
Yeah.
So
Well, like I said, I feel like he would have done a really good job with The Hobbit. It would have been
yeah,
interesting to
definitely.
see his take on The Hobbit. And I think a lot of people were genuinely excited. They're like, oh my God, yeah. Del Toro and the Lord of the Rings movies? Hell yeah.
I was
I
not.
would love that. I was. I
I
was
was
like,
not.
okay, cool. That'd be interesting. Just because, like, you saw what he did with Hellboy. You know how weird he could take things. And The Hobbit gets pretty weird, in my personal opinion, compared to Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is mostly, it is a straightforward narrative, but I would say that I would argue The Hobbit has a lot of, like, side quest.
No.
No.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
No.
No.
I see where you're trying to go with that. I wholeheartedly disagree with you, but I get your point.
Mm-hmm. It'd be interesting. Let me put it that way. It would be cool to see a weird take on Lord of the Rings.
Well, okay. I think Lord of the Rings is weird enough on its own. I think they didn't go weird enough with the movies originally.
Have you seen the Bakshi film? The
The who one?
animated film?
Oh no,
Oh.
no, I haven't. But I've read
They
all
go
the books.
weird.
They could have gone weirder with the original movies. I wholeheartedly agree with that.
However, I will argue at the time that the original Lord of the Rings movies came out, fantasy was seen as a joke. So the fact that Warner Brothers was taking such a high risk on this movie, I feel like they almost had to play it a little safe.
Yes.
And then you notice they definitely got a little weirder as the movies went on.
Well, it wasn't even just a joke. It was just a fact of like y'all said, it was like a big risk because during that time it was still like, even I remember when I was like little, like kind of like comparing this to like when Harry Potter was coming out, I was starting to realize that I would like talk about it and we read the books and stuff. And then when the first movie came out, and then, like the so on and so forth, and then I would ask certain people during the time that I knew if they would watch it or read it, and they were like, "No, my parents don't approve of that because they think something or the other, whether it's like witchcraft or whatever." But it's just one of those things. It's like during those times, like a lot of stuff was not allowed to be either put on screen or put on television because of different time periods.
I would argue that the 70s really kind of changed that. But I would still argue another good one is I would have loved Del Toro's take on Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Because the movie we got, when it's scary stories, when it's actually scary stories, it's done incredibly well. It's like, it is intense, it is good. But the in-between is kind of the weakest part. And I just kind of don't like that. And I mean, I still enjoy the movie. I would still say, like, if my nephew is like 12 or 13 years old and he's like, hey, I want to get into horror movies, I'd be like, do I want to show you something that your mother would kill me? Or do I want to show you this that your mother would be like, okay, it's fine? Like, I would even argue as little as 8 or 9, which actually
I
would
would have
be here in the
started
next few
with
years.
Goosebumps, like just flat
Well,
out.
Goosebumps, yeah, but like this is like, let's say he already watched Goosebumps, because I know his mom. His mom would want him to watch Goosebumps if he wants to watch something scary. But I would argue that this is a good like next step into horror. Goosebumps is really good. I have a nephew. I've talked about my nephew before.
Evidently, I wasn't paying attention.
Wow, Inara, love you too. Anyways,
Hi.
But I will say this: like, I would argue that Scary Stories is a good introductory to the hardcore stuff, because this it earns its PG-13 rating with like some of the most shocking stuff, like the spiders. Not particularly scared of spiders, but it was still, you could almost feel it crawling on your skin. The red spot. The scarecrow segment is one of the best in my personal opinion. I would also argue the red room is genuinely intense. I just love the movement of the scarecrow. I think that's like my favorite scary stories one. The who ate my big toe. That one was okay. I would argue that that is a really good effective jump scare
I
because
still
I
can't believe
like
that's
that.
a damn thing.
Yeah, who ate my big toe? But yeah, I would argue that Del Toro had more of a hand in this movie. That I think he actually started off in the production. Like I think like when the production started, like filming and everything, I think he was behind the director's chair, and then he kind of said, I want to work on something else. So you go ahead and direct this. I'll just put my name over it." And it's like, okay. So I feel like that's what happened. I don't necessarily know if that is the case, but it is one of those
You weren't
things that
there?
what? Yeah, I know. I wasn't there. Huh. It's funny. But yeah, and that's not going to be on the DVD's features. It's not going to be like, oh, yeah, well, Del Toro originally started directing. No, they're not going to do that. They're just going to be like, well, when Del Toro came to me with this idea, I was wholeheartedly excited. Because that's exactly how every single one of those interviews go. But that's besides the point. I feel like, arguably, I can understand now because everybody that I usually talk to, they're like, Del Toro would have been a great fit for The Hobbit. But you're the first person in Nara that has ever really truly come up to me and said, I wasn't that excited. And so there you go.
Yeah,
I could feel like he could feel the mixed signals on it.
There's I like it when he is allowed to go full Pan's Labyrinth or Hellboy when all of that
Mm-hmm.
is allowed to come out, and I had a feeling that because Lord of the Rings had come out already,
Mm-hmm.
they weren't going to let him fully lean into that, which they shouldn't have, because honestly, if you want it to be cohesive, definitely shouldn't let him like
Yeah.
but run off with it. But um it would have been an interesting take, but I prefer to see him when he's allowed to do creatively what he wants and what he's good at.
True.
Whereas when he is handed lore that is amazing and wonderful and great on its own, we kind of see where that's gone in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I'm not a huge fan of letting him do that again.
Fair enough. Everybody forgets that he directed Blade 2 as well.
Yeah, but I mean, like,
Blech.
when you compare Blade to like Lord of the Rings has more like
More
lore and
in-depth lore.
stuff
I would
than
argue that.
Blade.
I'm
Like,
just
I'm
saying,
I'm not saying like Blade doesn't have a well-depth story, like the
it
comics and
does.
everything, but not as much impact and not as much information as Lord of the Rings.
Well, and here's the other thing that I did want to bring up with Del Toro. It seems like 9 times out of 10 when he's doing something, it's like Pan's Labyrinth is very Alice in Wonderland, but his own interpretation of it. Shape of Water is very much his own Creature of the Black Lagoon, but his own interpretation on it, where the monster is actually the good guy, which I like that. And I did enjoy Shape of Water. I don't think it deserved Best Picture. I think that was just an Oscar handout, really. Partly because of around the time it was going out, and we're not going to get into that because that does get inherently political. But I do feel like it was just the Oscars going, we only have one Spanish director in line for Best Picture, Guillermo del Toro for Shape of Water. It's like, okay, cool, whatever.
Uh,
So I don't think it was the Best Picture of that year. If you go back and look at the other movies that came out around that time. But, I would still argue it is a good movie. But, now you look at Pinocchio. That was very much Del Toro's Pinocchio. Like, there is no donkeys in that
yeah.
movie, just FYI. And he also places in Italy during World War II. You see
Yeah.
Mussolini, which is great. I love that. But it's just one of those things. It's like, okay, it is still very much his own interpretation of it. And I did enjoy it. I love it whenever he takes risks like with stop motion, because you don't see stop motion all that much anymore. There was a boom after Nightmare Before Christmas and
Mhm.
Coraline, and then it just kind of died out. And
Well,
I
it
hate
was
that.
like it went from Wallace and Gromit, and then
Uh-huh.
Chicken Run, and then Coraline, Nightmare Before Christmas, James and the Giant Peach, and then at some point when you were saying like it died down, then I remember vividly. like the old Disney Channel channels had Shaun the Sheep, and that got me a little bit excited because it just reminded me of like all the stop motion. Same thing with Bob the Builder. I just forgot about Bob the Builder too. Like that was also claymation. Like,
yeah. And now it's a CGI monster, but we're not
oh
going
yeah,
to talk about that. So I would argue still that, I would like to see Del Toro do more dark, twisted fairy tales. I think, like, I would love to see an outright interpretation of Alice in Wonderland in stop motion. I feel like that would be done incredibly well in Del Toro's hands.
it would have to be very specific because it's getting to a point to where revamping like old fairy tales is
Mm,
becoming a little bit stale. Not in the sense of like, oh, like been there, done that. No, like it's being too frequent. Like it's being
true.
overused.
And you could argue that Disney is doing that with their live action remakes.
Yeah.
However, I still think that Del Toro's Pinocchio is one of the best Pinocchio adaptations we had gotten last year, because you had the dog shit that was the Disney one, and then you
Yeah.
had the weird one with Pauly Shore. Yes, there is a Pinocchio with Pauly Shore voicing Pinocchio
Oh God.
that came out
Okay.
in 2022, and oh man, that movie is weird. But we're not going to get into that. However, it is one of those things. It's just like, you had those two interpretations of Pinocchio. Arguably, you would think Disney would make the most money. Nope. Um, Even with the star power of Tom Hanks, who Tom Hanks has even stated, he's like, you know what, I'm kind of fucking done with this shit. I would argue that I would like to see Del Toro do more freaky, weird things and try to do his own versions of fairy tales. So it's just one of those things that I feel I would like to see him do that. I would like to see him go into the more horrifying stuff again, just because I like it whenever he does horror. It's great,
Yeah.
you know.
I
And
feel
it's
like we're at a part where we're getting closer and closer every year. Like it's getting harder to kind of like in cinematic slash just anything that has to do with artists like cartoons or whatever, when you're going to like a dark place or a more mature content place, I feel like it's less and less being died down because it's being more, we need to censor or sensitize stuff like this. Like I feel like that's where we're at a point now.
yeah, I could argue that, and I think that Del Toro is one of the last people that could definitely get away with it. Like, you look at HBO, they're not afraid to do kiss up. I mean, even though they are dying, Netflix is arguably not afraid. Like, I believe they are the people behind Del Toro's Pinocchio, but I think that they gave it a PG-13, if I'm not mistaken, and it earns it in every right. I mean, this movie has drinking, it has fucking people getting blown up, heavily implied. Like, you basically see the bomb go in, and then all you see is somebody else shooting out the other side, and it's just like, damn. It is. I mean, like, there's not necessarily language, but like there's definitely some harsh stuff in this movie, and it's just. I mean, you could still get away with that with PG.
Yeah,
Obviously, Puss in Boots and The Last Wish did it really well. Getting away with like certain elements that it's like, yeah,
jokes
that
and elements and
yeah, like I said, there's actual death in Puss in Boots and The Last Wish, and it
yeah.
got a PG rating. Just
I
saying.
I mean, it's the same thing. It's like we're getting to a point to where sensitizing and using innuendos and doing that stuff. It's kind of getting to a point to where
I have a
like
feeling it's coming back, and I have a feeling it's going to come back within the next few years with a fucking army. I really do. I feel like it's going to come back with the force of an army. Because, like I said, you are starting to see movies that if they get the PG rating, they're starting to take a little bit more of the risk. Hell, if they get PG-13, they're really starting to take the risk. You look at Shazam, which is a fun done superhero movie, has some genuinely horrifying shit in there. It's just one of those things. It's like I feel like you could do this incredibly. You have so much opportunity with all of these things, and it's just
yeah,
I feel like, yeah, definitely this desensitize or the sensitizing and the censoring and everything else like that. I feel like it's starting to die out because people are starting to see that as like, why the fuck do we watch this, watered down shit because we hate it? Why are we being forced to watch it? And then you see some, and then they see somebody's like, oh yeah, no, hey, we'll tell your kid to fuck off You want to watch The Last of Us? Here you fucking go. You want to watch a kids movie that has people literally get turned into skeletons and blow up into confetti, and actually has a cat fucking bleed? We got you. We're not Disney. We're not gonna pussify everything if as long as it has a PG in it. No. So it's just one of those things. Again, I feel like the MPAA is finally starting to get that stick out of their ass, and I love it. But yes, by Inara's face, I can tell we were very off topic. Just back onto Del Toro. I feel like Del Toro is also pushing a lot of this. Like you said, Series Stories Tell in the Dark is a PG-13 movie that earns that PG-13 rating. So it's just one of those things. And like Pinocchio, if it was PG, it definitely earned it. But I believe it was PG-13, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know. I'd have to look into it.
I think it is.
I don't know. That is a good question for another time. I hate the fact that I just referenced a Star Wars movie, but yes, a good question for another time. Anyways, I do feel that when it comes to Del Toro, I would like to see him do some more stuff, but I would also like with what she said, it is kind of predictable now. It's like, oh yeah, if he says, oh yeah, I'm doing this, it's like, yeah, I'll believe it when it comes out. And I feel like he does need to stop.
Yeah.
But granted, the last thing he ever did announce was Pinocchio. And that was the last thing he had that came out. I would love to see what he could do with everything else, and I still love him. I still love his versions of Hellboy. I like Blade 2. I think Blade 2 is arguably more fun than Blade, even though Blade is a fun movie. I love Blade. It's not Blade Trinity, and unfortunately, it's not Blade 2. But it is what it is. So, is there anything else that you guys would like to say with this, or anything along those lines?
I mean, I think we've said everything.
Yeah.
For it.
So this has been the SnodaCast presents SnodaReels. We will try to get more of these out frequently. I'm hoping I can get this weekly, but if there is weeks where we're not posting anything, it's probably just because we haven't come up with a topic for that for a little while. I believe next week I would like to try and talk about new and old modern horror masterpieces. New modern horror masterpieces. What would you consider that? And I'm also going to be bringing on Benji, and I just kind of want to go from there. So we'll try to tighten up that question a little bit better. I would say probably what would you consider a new horror masterpiece?
Okay.
Yeah.
I like that.
So I think that's a good topic for next week. This should be posting the day that we're recording the next one, hopefully. And we're just going to go ahead and go from there. But I have been your host, Black56. I have been joined by DimondAssassin.
Peace, everybody. See you in the next one.
And whatever the hell she is, InaraSera.
Tried so hard.
Wow.
I tried so hard. And I got so far, but in the end, it didn't fucking
even matter.
Yeah. Alrighty then. And once again, we will see you all